The assignment, they say, is simple. Catch the first thought, a seemingly benign directive, yet one that demands a complete, radical overhaul of one's very operating system. We are creatures calibrated for speed, for the blur between impulse and action. To live fully, we are told, is to move. But what if the greatest truth resides not in the velocity of our journey, but in the intentional, almost painful deceleration of our pace? Imagine the simplest act, walking from one room to the next. For the unconscious mind, this is a non-event, a single, unbroken sweep of intention. But for the student of awareness, this mundane transit becomes a high-stakes experiment. You must deliberately walk slow. You must force the gears of perception to grind against the inertia of habit. You have to pay attention to what is happening around you, yes, but more critically, what is firing before you even recognize the action you are about to take. It requires a conscious sabotage of efficiency. Why? Because the moment you zip toward your destination, the mechanism of thought fires in a blinding, unobserved cascade. You become a passenger in your own body, convinced you are the driver. This week, the report comes in, I lived a little. A profound statement, implying that, for a time, the narrator was present enough to experience life outside the prison of pre-programmed reaction. But this presence is not effortless. It is a discipline that requires one to constantly check the rearview mirror of the mind, looking for the phantom train that has already passed. The assignment is a filter. It catches the first spark, the initial neural flare, before it ignites the full conflagration of reaction. And in these observations, we see the raw material of our daily suffering. We see the immediate threat assessment that occurs when the world, a simple piece of gym equipment, a casual comment in a meeting, is not perfectly aligned with our expectations. Consider the gym floor at 5 in the morning, a sanctuary of self-improvement, or perhaps just a temporary distraction from the silence. You approach a machine, ready for the next set, when a simple notification halts you. Someone's using that. For the unaware, this is a minor transactional hurdle. For the one practicing awareness, this is a seismograph reading of the soul. In that microsecond before the polite, "Oh, okay," the internal landscape erupts. The first thought screams, unchecked, unvetted. It is a torrent of injustice, a flash of territoriality, a sudden, boiling resentment toward the perceived obstruction. You catch the first thought, a victory, but the shadow it casts lingers. The blood begins to boil, the body starts to shake. This is the physical manifestation of the ego registering a boundary violation. The mind, having been momentarily suppressed from voicing the full, colorful obscenity, turns that energy inward, translating rage into a visceral, physical tremor. And this feeling, this intense, almost agonizing heat, this is what we mistake for being us. For half an hour, the mind cycles. I can't believe she did that. The replay is meticulous, the justification absolute. The awareness catches the initial flare, but the subsequent, self-inflicted psychological torture continues to run its course. The narrator masters the first thought, but the feeling lingers. This distinction is paramount. To stop the anger from being spoken is one level of mastery. To cease the internal justification that fuels the anger's afterburn is the next, more formidable challenge. The energy of that initial confrontation, that moment of bodily betrayal, shaking, sweating, the painful rush of heat, it holds the blueprint of our entanglement. We carry the residue of every unresolved irritation, like grit in the mechanism. The narrative, the justification of why we were right and they were wrong, is the engine that keeps the feeling vibrating long after the external event has concluded. Then comes the second arena, the professional setting. The meeting with leadership, the moment where social currency is highest and the perceived stakes feel existential. You offer a statement not intended to entertain, simply to contribute. And it lands, not with a splash, but with a profound, echoing silence. The kind of silence that feels less like a pause and more like a judgment rendered by an entire room. Embarrassment floods the system. It is a pure, humiliating exposure. The physical reaction is immediate, hot, sweaty, painful. This is the body screaming, "We have been rejected by the tribe." In this crucible, the assignment is truly tested. The first thought, perhaps, was the ill-conceived remark itself. But the second wave is the judgment about the remark. What an idiot. Everyone is looking at me. I have failed. This secondary thinking, the analysis of our own perceived failure, is often more damaging than the initial misstep. The narrator experiences this acutely. The self-assessment that they are an idiot, that everyone in the room is confirming this status. The painful physical state is the belief made manifest in flesh. But then, the shift. A realization cuts through the heat as clear and sharp as the initial blunder. This feeling, this hot, shaky, sweaty state, this is not me. It is a transient phenomenon, a neurological storm that has been given the keys to the vehicle. And once that realization takes hold that the feeling is just a temporary weather pattern, the storm begins to dissipate. Within minutes, the world returns to its normal texture. The crisis of identity, fueled by the second thought, dissolves, and life continues as if the painful moment never occurred. The external situation is unchanged, but the internal landscape has been fundamentally altered by the refusal to own the feeling. This is the profound lesson of non-self in action. You are not the anger. You are not the embarrassment. You are the witness that observes the anger arrive, observes the embarrassment peak, and notes the self-correction that allows the system to stabilize. The light, the awareness, does not judge the failure. It merely notes the reaction to the failure. Now, we come to the inevitable complication in this practice: dealing with people later. The encounter you dread, the conversation you know will force you back into the arena of potential conflict. The mind begins to spin its usual web of anticipatory rehearsal. I don't want to do this. I can't handle that confrontation. What if I say the wrong thing again? This is the devil's invitation, the ego trying to regain control by mapping out the future and thus rendering the present moment irrelevant. The wisdom offered here is a powerful countermeasure. Stay out of your head. Be willing to go deal with the situation anyway. The willingness to proceed, unburdened by the mental choreography of fear, is the true act of courage. When you approach the interaction from a place of presence, unpolluted by the predicted outcome, the reality rarely matches the horror manufactured in your internal cinema. The conversation flows, often smoothly, without the anticipated fight, because you refused to bring the fight with you. You showed up as pure presence, and the light naturally aligns what is necessary. If you make up your mind to do the necessary action, and you can successfully stay out of your head, it works out perfectly. This is not optimism. It is a statement of mechanics within a unified field of experience. When the thinking mechanism is quiet, the system operates flawlessly. It cannot fail. The path becomes clear because you are no longer obstructing it with mental projections, anxieties, and self-serving narratives of how things should be. But this perfection is conditional. The moment you let the thinking mechanism take the reins, the moment you try to direct the light according to the devil's script, it collapses. Thinking is the resistance. It is the friction that generates the heat, the anger, the shame. Thinking says, "This is how it should be," or "I should be further along." And here we stumble upon the great paradox that confounds the diligent student. As one practices, as the initial shock of confrontation fades, a new difficulty emerges. It seems harder to catch the first thought. The initial incidents are so sharp, so distinct, that they pierce the veil easily. But as the practice continues, the mind becomes more subtle, its movements faster, its deceptions more integrated. The feeling of being further away from awareness creeps in. This very feeling, the assessment of one's own progress, is the trap. If you think, "I should be further along," you are engaging in the very process you are trying to transcend. You are creating a mental benchmark, a comparison between the is and the should be. And as the teacher gently points out, if you think you should be somewhere, you are thinking, man. You are not present. That measurement, that self-critique, is just another form of that old, destructive mental chatter. It creates a distance between where you are and where you believe you ought to be, and that distance is where awareness is lost. The mind is designed to measure, to plot, to engineer the future, but in this domain, the domain of pure experience, measurement is poison. You cannot think your way into presence. You cannot think your way into dropping the thought. The only way to catch the first thought is to be so perfectly attentive in the present moment that the thought, whatever its nature, has nowhere to hide. It must reveal itself as a ripple on the surface of the still water. Thinking is not allowed. A stark, almost authoritarian declaration, yet rooted in radical compassion. Because to think is to create a self that is judged, a self that must improve, a self that suffers. When you drop thinking, the self dissolves. And when the self dissolves, there is only the experience, perfectly unfolding, perfectly whole. The relief described is palpable. It is perfect. Everything works out. You are no longer spending the day twirling your head, trying to solve problems that exist only in the projection of the next moment. You are free from the internal, endless administration of the self. But the conversation naturally drifts to the practicalities. Life is not always about avoiding confrontation. Sometimes, it is about navigating the aftermath of a shared experience, especially in professional domains. The question arises, what about reflection? What about learning from a mistake, like delivering unclear instructions that lead to a flawed outcome? Is this not a necessary function of intelligence, to evaluate what went wrong on the project and ensure it doesn't recur? This is the philosophical edge of the path. It is where the rigorous spiritual practice meets the demands of functional reality. The desire to learn, to improve, to apply intelligence to the next iteration, this feels deeply responsible. It feels like the mark of a mature being, but the teaching here is uncompromising. Do not do that. That is too liberal. That is the subtle re-entry of the thinking mechanism disguised as pragmatism. When you evaluate the milk delivery, did I communicate clearly? Did he have the information? You are still positioning a self, the evaluator, against an object, the incident. You are still engaging in an act of judgment based on a fixed standard. The argument centers on the inherent perfection of the light when one is truly present. If you are fully present, the instruction given, even the instruction to buy milk, is given with the clarity dictated by that moment of awareness. If the other person fails to execute, it is because they were unconscious, lost in their own head, their own narrative, their own idea of what kind of milk was really needed. The moment you step back to analyze, you imply that your present clarity was somehow insufficient, or that the outcome was somehow flawed relative to some imagined perfect trajectory. You are postulating an error where the light perceives none. If you were present, you gave what you could give. The outcome is the outcome. To judge it is to create anger about the wrong milk, to make buttermilk or cauliflower milk a cosmic failure. There is no self to evaluate. This phrase is challenging because it strips away our perceived identity as the responsible planner. But in the context of pure awareness, the next moment will simply be the next moment of presence. If you were clear then, you will be clear now. The learning is embedded in the experience itself, not in the subsequent mental dissection of it. The desire to reflect on a project failure, to ask, what went wrong? How can I prevent this? Is the echo of the ego's need for control. It assumes that reflection is the mechanism for improvement. The alternative view is that presence is the mechanism. When you are present for the next instruction, the next task, you will automatically adjust, not because you remembered a post-mortem review, but because your awareness is undimmed. This is the difference between operating from memory and operating from pure presence. Memory is a catalog of past thinking. Presence is the unconditioned awareness that knows exactly what to do in the now because it is not distracted by the then. When the questioner brings up the work environment, where it is rare for people, including themselves, to stop and evaluate what the other person needs to execute their part, the teacher gently pushes back. You see blame when you look for it. because you are looking for a reason outside yourself for the imperfect result. You seek to evaluate the interaction after the fact, to preempt the blame. But the light does not assign blame. The light is a state of being. If you are in the light, you are clear. If the other person is not operating from the light, their execution will be flawed, and that is their reality, not a failure on your part to have mentally prepared them for their own unconsciousness. Their struggle is their struggle. The temptation to pause and evaluate is the mind trying to get ahead of itself, trying to build a protective wall of intellectual understanding around an experience that demands emotional surrender. You are trying to make an abstract rule out of an immediate, fluid reality. So, when you tell your staff to do something and they don't do it, the temptation, jokingly acknowledged, is to call them a dummy. But the true, non-joking response within this framework is simply to be in the moment of that failure, without the layer of self-blame or external anger. There is nothing to evaluate in the light. Everything is perfect. Perfection here means that the event, as it occurred, is precisely what needed to occur to keep you practicing awareness. It is the grist for the mill of presence. You will treat people the way you should, because you are seeing them as they are, unconscious agents in their own dramas, and responding with clarity, not with the wounded reaction of your own ego. You don't have to do anything to make it work, because if you stop the thinking, the light works for you. The final exchange confirms the depth of the challenge. Did you do the assignment? The initial assignment of catching the first thought? The answer: I did not. This moment of admission, free from the should of having succeeded, is perhaps the purest form of awareness achieved in the whole dialogue. A simple, unvarnished acknowledgement of the current reality. The practice continues not by succeeding at the assignment, but by realizing that the failure to succeed is itself just another thought, another feeling to be observed and allowed to pass. This, finally, is freedom. The human mind is a magnificent, terrifying engine of simulation. We spend the vast majority of our conscious hours not engaging with the tangible world, but navigating a hyper-realistic internal theater constructed entirely of what was and what if. This text lays bare the mechanics of that simulation, particularly when confronted with friction, the unexpected roadblock, the social faux pas. The emotional registers, anger and embarrassment, are the tripwires that expose the underlying software running our lives. Anger is the defense mechanism screaming, "I am being wronged." Embarrassment is the social survival mechanism screaming, "I am being exiled." Both are rooted in the fiction of a separate, vulnerable self that needs to be defended, justified, and constantly managed. The core insight here is the separation of the event from the experience. The machine stops, the wrong milk is bought, the awkward silence falls. These are neutral events. The subsequent internal explosion is the entirely optional software update we layer onto the events, labeling it disaster. The narrator's journey through the gym incident illustrates the layered response perfectly. Level 1, the external event. Level 2, the immediate, pure first thought, suppressed. Level 3, the physical fallout, shaking, boiling blood, the ego's physical tantrum. Level 4, the cognitive replay, the 30-minute justification session. Level 5, the breakthrough realization. This shaking is not me. This process is a reverse engineering of consciousness. Most people live entirely within levels 2, 3, and 4, believing the entire cascade is their identity. What separates true presence from mere emotional management is the realization that the physical fallout itself, the heat, the sweat, is also just data. It is the universe showing you, in tangible, undeniable terms, the exact location and intensity of the self that is resisting. When you can observe your own hands shaking while thinking, fascinating, the resistance to this small inconvenience is manifesting as this precise level of adrenaline. You have moved from being the patient to being the physician. You are analyzing the fever without contracting the illness. This leads us to the crucial, almost paradoxical stance on productivity and learning. If we never evaluate, how do we build better processes? If we never reflect on the flat tire, how do we remember to check the pressure next time? The answer lies in redefining what learning means. Learning, in the context of the thinking mind, is about collecting data to build a superior future self. Learning, in the context of presence, is the instantaneous, non-judgmental recalibration of the current self. It is immediate alignment. When the flat tire occurs, the practical thinker steps in. This is necessary, limited cognition. A temporary tool deployment. You fix the tire, but the spiritual danger is clinging to the memory of the flat tire and using that memory to fuel anxiety about the next potential flat tire. That is the thinking trap. You've solved the problem, but you've created a future problem in its place. The teacher insists that the light, the state of pure awareness, is inherently perfect. This isn't a claim of moral perfection or flawlessness in execution. It is a claim of existential completeness. In the moment of pure presence, the action taken is the only possible action. To desire a different action is to deny the reality of the moment you occupied. And in denying the reality of the moment, you are denying the reality of the self that inhabited it. The paradox of the assignment becomes clear. The goal is to stop thinking, yet the mind constantly demands evidence of progress through thinking. The student expresses difficulty catching the first thought because they are evaluating their success, thus creating a meta-thought about the practice itself. It's like trying to grasp smoke by forming a fist around it. The act of grasping solidifies the smoke back into a concept, an idea of awareness, rather than allowing it to simply be. The directive to simply stop in the middle of an argument, to shock the devil, is a stunningly effective intervention. It bypasses the need for justification, for winning the point, for establishing dominance. In the midst of escalating heat, to simply go silent, to stop feeding the fire with more words or more justifications, is to starve the entire conflict. You are withdrawing your conscious energy from the feedback loop that sustains the aggression. The confusion it causes others is merely the reflection of their own immersion in the thinking process. Your sudden departure from their expected script throws them off balance. It is a masterclass in non-resistance. You are not resisting the person. You are simply refusing to participate in the process of escalation. You are saying with your silence, "I am no longer playing this particular game." The philosophical gravity deepens when we examine the concept of self in this context. When the narrator insists there is no self to evaluate, it's not a nihilistic statement. It is a phenomenological observation of the highest order. The self that is embarrassed, the self that is angry, the self that is proud of catching a thought, these are all objects appearing within awareness. They are fleeting constructs of thought and feeling. If there is no permanent, independent entity doing the evaluating, then what is left? Only the pure capacity to see. The awareness remains immutable, while the contents, the anxiety, the self-criticism, the desire for milk flow through it. This is the essence of the revelation. The problems we experience, the conflict, the shame, the regret, are not inherent to the events of life, but are exclusively generated by the thinking layer applied to those events. Think of existence as a vast, silent ocean. Our thoughts are the waves. We usually believe we are the wave. We fight the incoming tide of a wave labeled anger, or we try to sculpt a wave labeled success. The practice is about realizing, with every fiber of one's being, that you are the ocean itself. The waves are temporary distortions on your surface, and your true nature is the depth beneath them, perfectly still, perfectly present. When we talk about being clear and present in the moment, when giving instructions, for instance, it's about trusting the ocean, not the wave. If the wave of your consciousness is present, the words that emerge will be the right words for that instant. They will possess an inherent, effortless clarity because they are not being filtered through the sludge of past resentments or future anxieties. The person who misses the detail of the instruction, the person who brings the wrong milk, is operating from a wave of their own making. They are lost in their own internal weather system. The awakened response is not to mentally dissect their failure for future prevention, but to accept their current state as real and simply represent the clarity needed, without attachment to the outcome. The desire to reflect, to learn from errors in professional settings, is perhaps the most sophisticated way the thinking mind attempts to co-opt the spiritual path. It says, "I will use my intelligence to engineer awareness." But intelligence, divorced from direct presence, only engineers more complex thinking. It creates a feedback loop of self-monitoring that is exhausting and ultimately self-defeating. The speaker describes this as putting oneself into the situation artificially, trying to control the outcome by analyzing the past. It's like trying to pilot a ship by constantly looking at the wake it left behind instead of the horizon it is sailing toward. The wake is thought. The horizon is presence. The only way to ensure the next project goes smoothly is to be fully undistracted and energetically there for the next step. If you are present for the instruction, you will be clear. If you are present for the execution, you will notice any deviation instantly. You won't need to wait for the final report to see the failure. You will be an integrated, fluid part of the successful process. This is why the promise is repeated. It will always work out if you have a way to see. The way to see is not a technique. It is the cessation of looking away. It is the sustained commitment to non-distraction. If you are not looking away into the past or the future, you are perfectly aligned with the necessary action of the present. The world, as perceived by the thinker, is chaotic, requiring constant management. The world, as perceived by the present observer, is simply unfolding in its own inherent pattern. The chaos is internal, the frustration over the contract, the milk, the project. It is all generated by the insistence that the flow should conform to an intellectual blueprint. The light is simple. It does not require footnotes, post-mortem analyses, or self-flagellation. It just is. And so, the final posture must be one of radical acceptance of one's current capacity. The dialogue concludes with the gentle, almost humorous admission of failing the assignment. I did not. And in that final simple sentence, perhaps the greatest breakthrough of the week occurred. The self that must succeed, the self that must be aware, has been momentarily silenced. There is no need to explain, no need to defend, no need to apologize for the state of not catching the thought. It simply is not. The perfection of the light is this. It welcomes the state of not catching the thought just as readily as it observes the moment of catching it. The light is non-discriminating. It does not say, "Good job, you were present," or "Bad job, you were thinking." It simply illuminates whatever is there. To stop thinking is not to become a passive vegetable. It is to become the most effective agent in the world, precisely because you are no longer wasting vital energy fighting an internal battle that has no foundation in reality. You stop twirling your head, you stop trying to figure out the next big thing, and you simply engage. The universe is not waiting for you to be perfect, it is waiting for you to be present. And in that presence, the messy, confrontation-filled, embarrassing reality of human existence transforms. The anger is seen, not owned. The embarrassment is felt, not internalized. The next step is taken, not planned to death. This is the quiet revolution, the surrender of the need to be in control of the narrative, allowing the inherent wisdom of simply being to guide the way. It is a return to the fundamental physics of existence, where friction is the only impediment to smooth operation. Drop the friction, drop the thought, and everything effortlessly works out.